9 a.m. Nina's hair was wavy and wet. Sand clung to the edges of her feet, settled in the pockets behind her knees and the roots of her hair. She put her board back in the shed and fastened the lock. She did not want to get out of the water, but there was so much to be done. As she started up the long, steep path to her house, her legs felt wobbly, her back and chest just as tired and sore as they were every time she came out of the ocean. Still, she made it easily up the hillside to her yard. She headed directly for the outdoor shower. It was made of teak panels and a faucet alongside of the house. As she pulled off her dark green halter bikini, she didn't even need to shut the shower door. There was no one and nothing to see her naked body but the ocean and the bougainvillea. She let the water warm her iced skin, washing away the brine, rendering her once again a clean slate. Then she turned off the faucet, grabbed a fresh towel, and walked into her house. Her huge, quiet, echoing house, full of space and light. The home was all open hallways, glass walls, ivory couches, and ecru carpets. It was intimidatingly casual, as if its excellence was entirely without effort. Paintings Brandon had collected, a Warhol, a Herring, a Liechtenstein, hung on the walls, adding a scribble of red or a dash of orange to an otherwise aggressively pale home. Nina dried her hair as she walked towards the stairs to her bedroom, but as she passed the kitchen, she saw the red light blinking on her answering machine. Worried that Jay, Hud, or Kit needed her, she pushed the button and started listening. Hey Nina, it's Chris, Travertine. Looking forward to the big party tonight. Wanted to give you the heads up before I see you. There's nothing we can do about them releasing extra photos from your calendar shoot. They own them. And you are technically not nude. You are wearing a bikini. Anyway, look, you look hot, alright? Onward and upward. And let's talk tonight about Playboy. Alright, bye bye. Love. See you soon. Nina erased the message and walked up the steps to her bedroom. She looked at herself in the sliding mirrors that covered her closets. She looked like her mother. You could see June in her eyes and eyebrows, the way her cheekbones rounded her face. She could see her mother in her body. She could feel her in her heart, could sense her in everything she did sometimes. The older she got, the more obvious it became. Nina was 25 now, and that felt young to her because she was so much older than 25 in her soul. She'd always had a hard time reconciling the facts of her life with the truth of it. 25, but she felt 40. Married, but she was alone. Childless, and yet, hadn't she raised children? Nina threw on a pair of cuffed jeans and a faded blondie t-shirt that she'd cut the arms off of. She left her hair damp and dripping slightly down her back. She grabbed her silver watch and put it on, noticing that it would be 10 o'clock soon. She was meeting her brothers and her sister for lunch at the restaurant at noon. While technically all of the Rivet kids had inherited it, it was Nina who felt an obligation to make sure it continued to thrive. She did it not only for the people of Malibu, but for her mother and her grandparents who ran it before her. The weight of their sacrifices to keep it standing pushed her to do the same. And so she usually went over for an hour or two Saturday mornings to do the spot checks and greet customers. This morning, she didn't really feel like going. Lately, she almost never felt like going, but her mere presence brought in customers and she felt an obligation to be there. So Nina slid her feet into her favorite leather flip flops, grabbed the keys to her Saab, and hopped in the car. 1956. Every Saturday night for 3 months, Mick took June to dinner. They went out for burgers and fries, or Italian, or steak, and they always shared dessert afterward, fighting for the last bite of pie or ice cream. It had become a joke between the two of them, their mutual love for sugar. Once, Mick picked June up for a date with his hand closed into a fist. I have a gift for you, he said with a smile. June pried open his fingers to find a sugar cube on his palm. Sugar for my sugar, sweet for my sweet, he said. June smiled. Quite the charmer, she said as she took the cube from his hand. She put it right into her mouth and sucked on it. I understand you brought it as a joke, but I'm not going to let it go to waste. He kissed her right then, still tasting it on her lips. I brought a whole box, actually, he said, gesturing to the front seat where a box of Domino sugar cubes was resting against the back of the seat next to a bottle of rye. They didn't even go out for dinner that night. They drove up the coast, eating sugar cubes, drinking whiskey right out of the bottle, and teasing each other over who could control the radio. When the sun set, they parked at El Matador, a pristine and stunning beach hidden under the bluffs, home to rock formations so massive and breathtaking it looked as if the ocean had made its own Stonehenge. Mixed windshield framed the waves coming in down the shore. A beautiful movie they weren't watching. The two of them were drunk and sugar rushed in the back seat. I love you, Mick said in June's ear. June could smell the whiskey on his breath, could smell it coming out of her pores. They'd had so much, hadn't they? Too much, she thought. But it had gone down so easy. It scared her sometimes, just how good it tasted. His body was pressing against hers, and it was, she thought, the most miraculous feeling. If only he could press into her farther, hold her tighter. If only they could fuse together. Mick put his hand up her skirt slowly, testing the waters. He got up to the top of her stockings before she pushed him away. I'm starting to feel like I can't live without you, he said. June looked at him. She knew that was the sort of thing men said to women just to get what they wanted, but if she wanted it too? But what if she wanted it too? They didn't give you any answers for that part. All they said was to bat his hand away until you were married. Nobody told you what to do if you felt like you'd die without his hand pushing farther up your legs. If you can't live without me, she said, regaining some control of herself, then you know what to do. Mick released his head onto her neck in defeat, and then he pulled away ever so slightly and smiled. Why are you saying that? Are you saying that because you think I won't ask you to marry me right now? June's heart began to beat light and fast, as if trying to fly. I have no idea what you'll do, Mick. You're gonna have to show me. Mick buried his head into her shoulder once more and kissed her collarbone. She hummed with the delight of his lips on her. I want to be your first, she said. She knew exactly what she was doing, making a statement like that. It would allow him to give her the answer she wanted and make her think it was the truth. You will be, he told her. He would tell her whatever she wanted to hear. That was the way that he loved her. June kissed him. I love you, she said, with all of my heart. I love you too, he said, as he tried one more time. She shook her head and he nodded and let up. That night, when he dropped her off, he kissed her and said, soon. Mick and June walked along the Santa Monica Pier, the roller coaster and carousel just ahead. The worn boards creaked underneath their feet. June was wearing a white dress with black polka dots. Mick was in trousers and a short-sleeved button-down. They looked good together and they knew it. They could feel it in the way people responded to the sight of them, the way cashiers perked up to serve them, the way passers-by took an extra second to glance. As they walked toward the water, with the Ferris wheel dominating the sky to their left, they were peeling pink sticky wisps of sugar off the mound of cotton candy Mick was holding. It had tinted June's lips a rose-colored hue. Mick's tongue was dyed as red as a raspberry. He threw the empty paper cone of the cotton candy in the trash and turned to June. Junie, he said, I wanted to run an idea by you. Okay, June said. Here goes, Mick said as he got down on one knee. June Costas, will you marry me? June gasped so hard she gave herself the hiccups. Honey, are you okay? He asked, getting up off his knee. June shook her head. I'm fine, she said, trying to gain control of her breathing again. I wasn't expecting this today. Do you mean it? Really? Mick pulled out a tiny ring, a thin gold band, a diamond smaller than an apple seed. It's not much, he said. It's everything, she told him. But one day I'll get you a huge ring, so big it will blind people. Oh, wow, she said. I'm on my way. I'm going places. I know you are. I can't do it without you. Oh, Mick. So is that a yes? He said. He was surprised to find himself finally nervous. You're saying yes, aren't you? Of course I'm saying yes, she said. I think I was put here on this earth to say yes to you. Mick lifted her into his arms and spun her around. And June suddenly felt as if human flight was no big thing at all. I know that I can make you happy, he told her as he put her down and put a ring on her finger. I promise you will never have to step another foot in that restaurant once you're mine. And I'll get you the house of your dreams one day. 2 sinks in the bathroom, bedrooms for as many kids as you want, the beach at your front door. All she had ever wanted. Of course I will be your wife, June whispered, tears in her eyes. It's me and you, baby, Mick said as he pulled her close to him. She buried her head in his neck, inhaled his scent, pomade, and aftershave. They held hands as they made their way up the pier, and Mick kissed June with a passion and gravity that had never kissed anyone with before. His parents had died when he was barely 18, but now he was building his own family, his own piece of the world. They would be different, he and June. When they got to his car, they quickly made their way to the back seat. And this time, when Mick slipped his hand up her dress, June let herself rejoice. She let herself be touched, the way she had so desperately yearned to be touched by him. People act like marriage is confinement, June thought, but isn't this freedom? She was thrilled to finally be able to say yes, to feel everything she wanted to feel. As they pushed against each other, June guessed, from the confident way Mick held her, the finesse with which he moved, that it was not his first time. Her heart ached a bit to know he'd lied to her, but hadn't she asked him to? She found herself drawn to him, that much more, quenching the need to be the only one who mattered. She let him push himself into her, pulled him as close as she could, and she let it all go. June was shocked, surprised, stunned when he put his hand on her while he was inside her. She felt embarrassed and shy about being touched like that, but she did not want to tell him to stop, could not bear the thought of him stopping. Moments later, bliss ran through her like a bolt. And somehow, as she lay there next to him in the back of the car, the two of them breathless, June understood that she could never go back to who she was even a moment ago, now that she knew what he could do to her. I love you, she said. And he kissed her and looked her in the eye and said, I love you too. God, Junie, I love you too. The next day, Mick came over and held her hand as they stood in her parents' kitchen and told them they were getting married. I wasn't given much of a choice, it seems, her father said, frowning. Dad, Theo nodded. I'll hear him out, June. You know me well enough to know that. I'll always hear a man out. He nodded to Mick. Come on, son, let's talk about your plan to take care of my daughter. Mick winked at June as he followed Theo into the living room. She felt a tiny bit more at ease. Get the chicken out of the fridge, honey, her mother said. We'll make chicken and rice for supper. June did as she was told, moving quietly, trying to hear what her father was saying to Mick. But she couldn't make out a single word. As Christina lit the stove, she turned to June. "He's certainly as handsome a man as I've ever seen," she said. June smiled. "My God," Christina said. "He looks like a young Monty Clift." June got the carrots out and put them on the cutting board. "But that's just all the more reason to be cautious," Christina said, shaking her head. "You don't marry the boys who look like Monty Clift." June looked back down at the carrots in front of her and started chopping. She knew her mother would never understand. Her mother never bought new dresses, never tried a new recipe, never watched TV except the news. She watched her mother reread her old worn copy of Great Expectations over and over every year. Because why take a chance on another book when I already know I like this one? If June didn't want her mother's life, then she couldn't take her mother's advice, plain and simple. 20 minutes later, as Christina was stirring the rice and June was nervously setting the table, Mick walked in, Theo's hand on his shoulder. Theo smiled at June. "You might have picked a good one after all, honey." June, overcome, ran to Mick and her father and hugged them both. "You have my blessing," Theo said, turning his gaze to Mick. "With the caveats we talked about, son." Mick nodded. "Thank you, Daddy," June said. Theo shook his head. "Don't thank me. Mick here's got a few years in him to try to make it big, and then he's ready to do the right thing and take over the restaurant." Theo shook Mick's hand. Mick smiled and shook it back. "Yes, sir," he said. Theo went over to Christina and June pulled Mick aside. "We're going to take over the restaurant," she whispered. Mick shook his head. "He just needs to hear what he needs to hear right now. So I gave it to him." "But did you hear the first part? A few years to make it big?" "I don't need a few years. Don't worry, Junie." Over dinner, Mick complimented Christina's cooking and Christina finally smiled. Mick asked Theo for advice on car insurance, and Theo gladly stepped in to consult. And over dessert, strawberry shortcake, Theo asked Mick to sing. "June says you sing Cole Porter better than Cole Porter," Theo said. Mick demurred and then acquiesced. He put his napkin on the table and stood up. He started singing "I've Got You Under My Skin." Before he got to the bridge, Theo was nodding along, smiling. Mick felt the lump in his throat, so he carried on, but he pushed harder out of his sternum, held the notes a bit longer than normal, and when he was done, Mick caught his breath, unable to look at Theo as he tried to steady his pulse. June clapped. Theo joined her. "Nicely done," he said. "Nicely done." Mick looked at him, finally took in his approval. Christina smiled wide, but June noticed she neither parted her lips nor scrunched her eyes. "Lovely," she said. Mick said good night to everyone shortly after dinner. He kissed June on the cheek in the driveway. "We're really going to be something together. You know that, don't you?" he asked her. And June beamed. "Of course I know that." He held her hand tight as she tried to walk back into her house, as if she could drag him with her. He dropped it at the very last second, not wanting to say goodbye. He stayed in his car until she waved at him from her bedroom window. Then he backed out and went on his way. Christina found June in the bathroom moments later washing her face. Christina was already in her robe. She'd set her hair and rollers to sleep in. "June, are you sure?" Christina asked. June felt her shoulders begin to slump. She straightened them out. "Yes, I'm sure. I know he's handsome and I know he's got a great voice, but what, Mom?" June asked. Christina shook her head. "Just make sure he knows how to run a restaurant." "Did it ever occur to you," June said, feeling her voice getting higher, "that I might be meant for something bigger than a restaurant off the side of the road?" Christina's face tightened, her lips pursed together, as if she was guarding herself against her daughter's sharp tongue. June braced herself for a moment, unsure how her mother would react, but Christina softened once more. "I know you like all this flash, honey," she said, "but a good life is knowing people care about you, knowing you can take care of the people that count on you, knowing you're doing a little something in your community. The way your father and I do that is by feeding people. I truly can't think of much bigger than that, but that's just me." June apologized and kissed her mother good night. And then she picked up a copy of Sub Rosa and imagined one day reading about Mick in those pages. Mick started getting paying gigs at restaurants in Hollywood and Beverly Hills singing standards while rich people ate dinner. Then he booked a few clubs in Hollywood with a backup band he'd put together called The Vine. With each show, June became prouder and prouder, telling anyone who would listen that she was marrying a professional musician. Mick and The Vine booked a show in a small casino in Las Vegas, a week on a cruise to Ensenada, a wedding for the head of Sunset Studios. Then the Mocambo called with an offer for Mick to do 2 shows there solo. June jumped up and down when he told her. Mick picked her up and swung her in the air. The first night at the club, June came with him and stood behind the curtain as he sang, staring at the stars who came and took seats. She thought she saw Desi Arnaz. She could have sworn Jane Mansfield was there. When Mick finished at the Macambo, he was invited to play at the brand new Troubadour in West Hollywood. And suddenly there it was, his name on the marquee, Mick Riva, one night only. June delighted in it all. I'm marrying Mr. Mick Riva, she would say to Mrs. Hewitt, who ran the grocery, Mr. Russo, who delivered the clams to the restaurant, Mrs. Dunningham at the bank. He just did 2 nights in the combo. Don Adler was there. I saw him there with my own eyes. The night before he was there, Ava Gardner had come in. Ava Gardner. She showed off her tiny ring to her childhood best friends and the girls who picked up shifts at the restaurant sometimes. He's going to be a big singer one day. Already is practically, she'd say. 2 months later, Mick finally got his meeting with Frankie Delmont at Runner Records. A week after that, he came to June's house with a record deal and a new ring. This one twice the size of an apple seed. You didn't have to do this, June said. It was so brilliant, so bright white. I wanted to do it, Mick said. I don't want you walking around with a tiny little something. You need bigger, you need better. June had liked the small little ring, and she liked this one too. Just wait, Mick said. We're going to have so much money, it's going to be embarrassing. June laughed, but that night she went to bed dreaming about their future. On the sand under a huge tent. When she confessed these ideas to him, asking if he thought any of it was possible, he always told her the same thing. I'll give you the world. He would whisper it in her ear as he took off her dress. He would pledge it to her as he put his leg between hers. Anything you want, I'm going to make sure you get it. He would run his hand down her back and kiss the skin behind her ears, grab her hips. Who could blame June for how often she lay naked beside him before they were married? When he knew so well how to touch her. When they realized June was pregnant, neither of them was surprised. June, Christina said as she shook her head, standing in the kitchen of Pacific Fish, whispering her frustration. I thought you were smarter than this, honey. I'm sorry, June said, nearly in tears. I'm sorry. Christina sighed. Well, you're going to have to move up the wedding. That's first. Then I guess we will get you a forgiving dress. And figure out the rest as we go. June dried her eyes. You're not the first woman in the world to lose her head over a man, Christina said. June nodded. Come on now, Christina said. Cheer up, Buttercup. It's a beautiful thing. She pulled June into her arms and kissed the top of her head. Mick and June said, I do, in a tent under the stars. Right there on the sands of Malibu, family on her side, some music executives on his. That night, Mick and June danced cheek to cheek as the band played standards. We're going to do it all right, Mick said to her. We're going to love this baby. And we're going to have more of them. And we're going to have good suppers and happy breakfasts. And I'll never leave you, Junie. You'll never leave me, and we'll have a happy home, I promise you that. June looked at him and smiled. She put her cheek back to his. Toward the end of the evening, Mick got up in front of the crowd. He grabbed the microphone. If you'll indulge me, he said with a half smile, I have a song I'd like to sing for you all tonight. I wrote it for my wife. It's called Warm June. Sun brings the joy of a warm June. Long days and midnights, bright as the moon. Nothing I can think of but a warm June. Nothing I can think of but you. June sat right in the front as he sang to her. She tried not to cry and laughed as she failed. If this was their beginning, my God, how high could they fly? Nina was born in July 1958. Everyone pretended she was premature. Mick drove them both home from the hospital directly to a new house. He had bought them a 3-bedroom, 2-story cottage right over the water, baby blue with white shutters on Malibu Road, the back half extending out over the sea. There was a hatch in the floor on the side patio that led to a set of stairs that went directly to the beach. As if a new house wasn't enough, there was a brand new teal Cadillac in the driveway. When June first walked through the house, she found herself holding her breath. A living room with windows that opened to the water, an eat-in kitchen, hardwood floors. Surely it couldn't have everything, could it? Surely each one of her dreams hadn't come true all at once. Look, Junie, look, Mick said, leading her excitedly into the master bedroom. This is where the king-sized bed will go. Holding tiny, delicate Nina in her arms, June followed her husband through the bedroom and soon made her way to the master bedroom. She looked at the vanity. She ran her right hand along the side of the sink, felt the smooth porcelain curve down, level out, and curve back up. And then she kept running her hand along the cold tile and rough grout until she hit the curve of porcelain of her second sink. 10 a.m. Nina pulled into the parking lot of the restaurant and shut off her engine. As she got out of her car, she glanced up at the sign and wondered if it was time to have it redone. Page 58.